Hi, I'm Elena,
I'm Rianna.
And I'm Dahlia.
and we're going to be talking about copyright and ethics in education. So starting off with what is copyright? According to Jackie Alsoffer, copyright includes all of the following aspects. So reproducing the work, preparing derivative work, distributing copies of the work to the public, and displaying or performing the work publicly all constitutes as copyright. So often teachers and librarians will request permission to use these works in their classroom so they can avoid copyright issues. And then in Iowa specifically, Standard 11.8 in ethics requires teachers to respect test copyrights. So that's something that teachers in Iowa will have to deal with on a daily basis. So how these affect teachers and students and the implications and consequences of copyright? Well, first of all, they affect everyday activities for teachers and students. So anything from email attachments, online discussions for online classes, or web or database articles, these all have copyrights. Also, their use in the classroom, so this can be for teachers or students, but tests, worksheets, games, different projects, and essays, these all have copyrights that teachers and students should be aware of. And then cost is a big thing that affects teachers. Some things will cost money to use in the classroom and to avoid copyright infringement. So that is depending on administrators and budgets. So cost is a thing to think about. And then since we live in a media-centered society where technology is very prominent in the classroom and outside of the classroom, the internet and articles found on the web all have copyrights, so those should be taken seriously. And knowledge is definitely necessary for teachers and students. So as Alsoffer said, innocent infringement is infringement nonetheless. So just because students and teachers aren't aware of copyright, that doesn't mean that there won't be copyright infringements. So students and teachers should be knowledgeable on the subject of copyrights and knowing what's permissible and what's not.
So the next topic is intellectual property. And what is intellectual property refers to is creations of the mind. So some examples are inventions, literary and artistic work, and symbols. It's divided into two categories, and those are industrial property and copyright. Industrial property includes patents of inventions, trademarks, or industrial designs, and copyright covers literary works like novels, poems, plays, and then there's films, music, artistic work, and architectural design. Intellectual property allows creators or owners of the patents, trademarks, or copyrighted works to benefit from their own work. It protects the rights of those who create the original works. And why we have this is because when people know that their work will be protected and they can benefit from their labor, they're more likely to continue to produce things that create jobs, develop new technology, and make processes more efficient. Fair use is the right to use portions of copyrighted materials without permission if the purposes are of education, commentary, or parody. So fair use does not cause infringement. However, it has exceptions, and fair use uses the four-factor test. And the four-factor test is if the four factors are proven, then it's considered fair use, and if it's not, then it's not fair use. So I'm gonna give two situations where one's fair use and one is not. The first situation is if a professor wants a textbook, but he thinks it's too expensive, so he doesn't want to buy it, but instead wants to make copies for the whole class. That is not considered fair use, because even though the purpose is education, he is making a lot of copies, which will affect the marketing monopoly of the copyright owner. The other situation is if a book is at the library, but it's unavailable or out of print, but the teacher needs it for his research, and wants to copy the book, that is fair use because the purpose is for education. And even though normally copying the whole book is not fair use, since the book is out of print or unavailable, it is considered fair use because it won't be affecting the market. Public domain, that is when there's no copyright restrictions on the work and on the works. So you can use this work for any purpose without infringement or permission. There are common misconceptions, though. One of these are people think unless the work has a copyright notice, it is in public domain, but that is wrong. Just because information on the web is publicly accessible or if a work is out of print, it does not mean it's out of copyright. The availability of a work has nothing to do with the underlying copyright. So to figure out if something is public domain or not, you ask yourself 2 questions, and those are who created the work and when did the creator die? If the creator died more than 70 years ago, his or her work should be considered public domain. But some other things to keep in mind about public domain is that different copyright rules apply in different countries, and a reproduction of a recording or a public domain work often qualifies for copyright, or an original adaptation or version of a public domain work is protected by copyright.
Okay, so sorry.
What can we as teachers use in our classrooms? So although there are some copyright issues, we can still use some of these materials in our classroom. A really good resource that a lot of universities have done in the past years is our library databases. So these are databases like EBSCOhost or Education Source, and libraries will make contracts with these databases and pay, and then students will be able to use the articles and the prints for free. So that's a really good resource for students and for teachers. And then purchasing items is another option. So purchasing videos, lesson plans, tests, textbooks, anything along those lines. That's always an option, depending on the cost and the budget, as I said earlier, but that's still something we can consider. And then anything like facts or U.S. government material are they're open for teachers to use. The Department of Education website, they have statistics for special education, for English language learners, anything along those lines. If those are from a U.S. government website, those are available for the public to use. And then just another option is getting permission from publishers or from creators of the works. So just asking them for permission to avoid all copyright infringements.
Okay, so what can we as teachers do to avoid having copyright issues in our classroom? One of the first things we can do is educate our students about what makes a quality website. So really looking into the websites and checking if the source is unbiased, on checking the dates to see if the information is relevant and current to what you are researching. You can also use services like Turnitin.com, which can detect plagiarism in papers. And creating an honor code with your students, which is basically just laying out the rules and your expectations for the student and really going through it with them and having them sign it, and even maybe sending it home to a parent just so they know what's expected of their students. And some consequences for students who violate copyright and ethical principles. We think that different consequences depending on the age and grade of the student should be enforced. So like, kids or students our age obviously are going to be, more harshly penalized for breaking copyright laws and rules. So for like elementary students, we think that when the student knows they did something wrong and they know that they cheated and, copied something, then they will receive no credit. But when the student is unaware of the broken rule, then maybe the teacher takes them aside and thoroughly explains what they did wrong and then gives them a chance to make up the work by fixing what they did wrong. And to curb these violations, maybe have handouts, posters in your classroom, and make sure you give out warnings about how to properly cite the sources. And there's our sources.